Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the Gospel of John. Today we're in John chapter 2. We're going to start reading at verse 13. Now, in the last few sessions, we've looked at the first 12 verses of chapter 2, which give us the account of Jesus' first miracle, where he turned the water into wine. Now, that occurred in Galilee, in Cana of Galilee. So Jesus has spent a little bit of time in Galilee, but now as we start verse 13 and on, he goes back to Jerusalem. And notice the reason that he returns to Jerusalem and the area of Judea. Verse 13. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now we can understand this. If at all possible, you would like to celebrate Passover in Jerusalem. Now, you didn't have to. You didn't have to go to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover. You could celebrate it in Galilee or wherever you were. But if possible, it's desirable to be in Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. And the city of Jerusalem was always filled to capacity during Passover time. Now, of course, we know that the Passover is the most important festival in the life of Israel. It's not the only festival. They have a number of festivals. Passover, of course, and Pentecost, and Tabernacles, and Hanukkah, and others that we could mention. But Passover was the most significant because Passover is that remembrance and celebration of how God delivered them from slavery in Egypt. Though they were in bondage to the powerful Egyptian empire, God, working through Moses, brought the people out with a mighty hand. Through the plagues he visited upon Egypt, he broke the back of the Egyptian power and brought Israel out as a free people. And the Passover is the remembrance of that redemption. It is the remembrance of how God delivered them from slavery and formed them as his covenant people. And when they celebrate the Passover, they remember all that God had done for them. And so any Jew of this time would love to go to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. And so it tells us in verse 13, Jesus returned to Jerusalem because it was time for the Passover. Now, interestingly enough, in the Gospel of John, 3 separate Passovers are going to be mentioned. There's this celebration of the Passover. In a few chapters, it'll mention again that Jesus is celebrating the Passover, although on the second occasion, he doesn't go to Jerusalem. We'll see that when we come to it. And then the third time it's mentioned is, of course, when Jesus goes to the Passover, when he will be crucified. So John mentions 3 separate occasions of the Passover in his gospel. Now, this is a little different from Matthew, Mark, and Luke, who only really focus on one Passover, and that is the final Passover when Jesus is crucified and then, of course, resurrected. So John mentions 3 during the ministry of Jesus, and this is what helps us sort of date how long Jesus' ministry was, because we know it was over a period of time that involved 3 different Passover celebrations. But this is the first one. Jesus goes to the Passover, and something very momentous is going to happen. In the temple courts, now remember, the temple at this time would be crowded. Now, the temple would always be crowded. There's always a lot going on at the temple, but at Passover, this would be especially true. So in the temple courts, Jesus found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others who were sitting at the table exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords. He drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers. He overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, "Get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a market." His disciples remembered that it is written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." So at this Passover, Jesus cleanses the temple. And he stops the trade and the business going on, the selling of animals for sacrifice, sheep and doves, and the exchanging of money. He cleanses the temple. Now in tomorrow's session, we want to look very particular why Jesus cleansed the temple, what's the significance of that, and what the response of the people to him was when he cleansed the temple. So tomorrow, join us as we look very specifically at why Jesus cleansed the temple and what that meant for his day and what it still means for us today when we think about what he did. So I hope you join us next time for our 5-minute Bible study in the Gospel of John.